Okay, so here Tushar is here. Tushar is the expert today. He will be talking more about the investor side and how to reach out to investors. And there will be question because I know when it comes to fundraising and investment, this is the first thing that any person who ever think to start up like look for to how to get fund. So he's the right person out here, and ask him as much question as you can, and he will have a small presentation out there, and he's
Sure.
there to go out with you all queries. And he is part of the Startup Monk group also. So once, even after this session, you can reach out to him through us. So here I have Tushar with me. So guys, welcome Tushar, and ask as much question as you can to him regarding the fundraising and anything. Perfect, Tushar.
So,
You can start now.
thank you. Thank you, Sivesh. It is my pleasure to be with the Sivesh today of Startup Monk. I've been seeing the groups who are prominently out there helping startups day in and day out, and Sivesh ranks amongst the top, and Startup Monk is doing very good work. Ayush also, I keep on speaking to him. So, today I would like to discuss more on how to approach investors, what is a term sheet, what factors to keep in mind. And this is my company, Consultancy Ventures. It's a business advisory firm, and I also have a angel network oblique fund, which is called Saffron First. So this is about me. In my corporate life, I have worked for private equity department in Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu. Times of India Brand Capital, I was part of the team which did around 600 crore worth of transactions like JP, Yamuna Expressway, SMC Group, and so on. Then I handled debt at MTS India, which is the India unit of Russian conglomerate Sistema, where I raised almost $2.5 billion of debt for the company in 3 years. And then I was CFO with a company called Distribution Logistics, which is owned by Guggenheim Partners, the American PE fund. In my investment journey, I'm an investor in 4 companies. One is an education company, which grew to 800 students and 3 centers. It was into IIT coaching. I sold it to Narayana Institute in 2006. Then there is a consumer B2B company called Indus B2C, which is standardizing human hair extensions business, which is a big export out of India. And then 2 recent small checks, which I wrote for technology companies, whose product is in beta stage. Then this is my management, Anurag Batra ji, the promoter at Business World and Exchange for Media. Rohit Bhatyani is right now with Bennett Coleman, but he was the one who helped Reliance Retail set up in India. Yogesh Gandhi set up Reliance Sports in India, and then he heads ASICS, the Japanese company in Singapore. He created almost $300 million of business for ASICS. Rajesh Jindal is CFO with the Amazon company Cloudtail, and Priyon, he's ex-finance director with Amazon India. Mr. Anil Parashar is the right-hand man of Bhatias of Indigo Airlines. He was MD and CEO of Interglobe, the holding company of Indigo Airlines. As of today, he is MD and CEO of the 500 crore company ITQ, which is the technology company of Indigo Airlines. Mr. Arun Chhabra is a partner at KPMG. Manish Goyal is a CFO at the payment gateway PayU, which is owned by Naspers. As you would know, Naspers is a South African giant which sold Alibaba's stake worth $35 billion. Mr. Jitendra Jain is ex-president finance Welspun and ex-group CFO GMR. And right now he has his own advisory firm in Mumbai called Arihant FinCon. Sonal Kohli managed $50 million Elara India Gateway Fund. He's a promoter of the fund. And for 3 years, he was awarded as the best returns generated in the stock markets from India. Monish Sabharwal ji is pioneer of the brand capital, which earlier was called private treaties. It's a very interesting model where media companies invest via cash and also by by giving media space. Mr. Virat Chauhan is Chief Communication Officer with PepsiCo in India right now. Amit Kumar Rajput is Head of Procurement and IT with PricewaterhouseCoopers. He founded Gromosome Ventures with Mr. Chauhan of Jabong. Ashu Agarwal is a founder with Mergs, but he has been a serial entrepreneur in the startup ecosystem. So this is the management. Yeah. So now the first question, how is the old way of raising early money different from today's way? So earlier we had a community-based approach in India. So Gujaratis, Sindhis, Telugu, anybody traveling abroad would help other person get financing, tell them about the business opportunities which are available, extend working capital, and so on. But actually the advent of modern financing has actually come when the concept of corporate veil came in, which means that a company or a corporate is a separate identity as compared to the owners of the company. So the owners of the company have limited liability. If the company takes loans, is unable to pay it, then the promoters are not personally liable or responsible. Since that thing came in, the corporates have a separate legal identity, and people are and they are willing to take external funding more easily, to take risks, and risk taking becomes much more easier. So, I have an example of the Dutch ships. That time, people used to buy a ship, and many of the ships didn't come back. So they faced losses. So they started crowdfunding there. A lot of people pooled in money and bought a lot of ships. So it was a portfolio approach. Some ships didn't come back, but the overall return on the other ships was so much that everybody made a profit. So then the concept of equity shareholding, fractional shareholding has come in, and the stock markets have come in. It's a beautiful system where people have fractional ownership of stocks, and the overall stocks add up to so much market value. So the risk-taking entrepreneur is incentivized because his stocks trade at a high value. So he is creating value for everyone, including himself. Thank you, Sivesh. Thank you. So coming to bridge financing, we have seen that I always advise startups, your fundraise and your business, they need not move in the same manner. So if you are getting access to equity financing and you don't require it right away, but you are getting it at a good valuation, take it. And there will be times when there is a very short time left to use that cash burn. So at that time, you will have to resort to bridge financing. There are three types of bridge financing. One is equity bridge. Equity bridge means you have only equity as collateral to give. And because you need some money in between two rounds, you give your shares as collateral and arrange funding. Similarly, a loan bridge is when you go to the bank or a financial institution, you tell them that I need a lot of debt, but till the time I avail that properly, I need some bridge financing. So the bank gives you less than 1 year loan at high interest rates till the time you raise the proper round of funding. Then the IPO bridge. So what happens is equity markets are not always in great shape. Sometimes we have a 2,000, 5,000 point decline. And at that time, any investor in a fresh IPO stops. He says, wait and watch. So at that time, for the promoters, it is not right condition to launch an IPO. So at that time, the promoter waits, and because he needs money and he's waiting for the markets to recover, so he approaches the investment banker, iBanker. The IB then gets, he underwrites the loan. There are two types of underwriting, soft underwriting and hard underwriting. A hard underwriting means that if the promoter requires 100 crores and he's getting 50 crores, then rest 50 will be given by the IB. But hard underwriting nowadays is not very famous in India. It is mostly soft underwriting where the IB says, okay, I'm underwriting it. And basis that assurance, the startup, the company goes to the market and arranges its money. Then we have convertibles. Convertibles are preference shares or debentures. There's a third thing, warrants. So what happens is you are saying your company is valued at 20 crores. The investor says it's valued at 100 crores. So what they do is they issue a convertible preference share or a convertible debenture. The conversion of that preference share or debenture into equity is tied to certain formula. It can be like, I'm putting 10 crores today till the time the next liquidity event, which means the funding round, happens in the startup. At the valuation at which that round happens, I will get a discount of around 20% because I entered early, I took a bigger risk. So whenever the next valuation happens, at that time, you'll give me a discount. Or it can be, the convertible can have a formula like whatever be the revenue and EBITDA of the company at the next round of financing, at that time, we put a multiple on the revenue or multiple on the EBITDA. And at that valuation, this investor today, at that time, his preference shares, convertible ones, will be converted to equity. Then there are differential voting rights. As we understand equity has a certain voting right in the board of directors. Now, what happens is that in abroad, see in India, the promoter clings to equity. Mujhe 80% rakhna hai. I want 75%. I want majority. Abroad, what happens is promoter thinks my company is going from $100 million to $1 billion. Even if I have 30%, I am a gainer. But then the practical problem is, in many cases, the promoter gets thrown out of the company. So like very famous Steve Jobs, he was thrown out from Apple. So because his voting rights in the company were less than 50%, he didn't have a control over the board of the company. So they invented differential voting rights. So Mark Zuckerberg holds less than 50% in Facebook, but his control over the board of directors is almost 75%. It is because the shares which he holds are extra rights. Similarly, Tata Group also uses DVRs to control its various companies in the conglomerate.
Just to add in here, Mark Zuckerberg is having, I guess, 2 voting rights. He is having somewhere around 38% of stakes and having 2 votes on each of his stakes. So he is having somewhere around 75% out there. So that's why he have control over the board when it comes to taking any decision out there.
Right. Thank you, Sevesh. Now, why do investors go after a small idea with a big growth strategy rather than a big idea with a smaller growing strategy? See, a big idea means we all know pyramids were constructed by the kings. These were vanity projects, big ego projects. The dam on the Nile, it was a big project. The Three Gorges Dam in China, it causes earthquakes. So, these are big vanity projects which people think will change the lives of many. But the dam on the Nile, it destroyed the whole ecosystem of Egypt, the Nile ecosystem. So people sometimes I remember at Hitler's times, many companies wanted to please Hitler. So they invented huge tanks, 3 stories, 4-story building type tanks. They never worked because they were so easy to bomb. So these are like big ideas which don't go anywhere, but we have small ideas like Khan Academy. Now Khan used to teach his children IIT entrance, but his children said, you are a vet, you don't know how to teach, so you better make videos. So he started making 10-minute videos and putting on the website. And he got so much of traffic that he turned it into a profession. He was called by Bill Gates, and Bill Gates gave him a huge money to expand the whole, democratize education. Similarly, Twitter is a small idea of connecting people through small tweets. Now, how did Twitter become a platform, became viral enough to have so much of audience? Because when you first register with Twitter, they came up with a very smart growth strategy that you have to follow different profiles at the time of onboarding Twitter. So as soon as you follow those profiles, you start getting content and it keeps you hooked. That's where Twitter got a success with its growth strategy. LinkedIn, you remember we used to create a profile on LinkedIn. It used to ask for our Gmail ID. And then it used to send emails to all our Gmail contacts. That's how it became viral. It was a very smart growth strategy. With Airbnb, if you use Airbnb, people used to get very confused with user reviews. That what is this user trying to say? What is this? They simplified it. 3 or 4 liners, 5 liners, proper rating against each service. And they simplified it so much that people really trust those reviews and they are able to make decisions. Amongst the big ideas, like China thought that they will turn the entire country urban. So they created big cities in between villages, which many of them are ghost cities and people are not using it. One big example in the corporate side for big idea going broke is WeWork. WeWork founders said that the office culture is very formal. So he said that the offices will become a community and people will eat with each other, play with each other. So he leased out buildings in prime locations, made them 7-star infrastructure, free food, free Wi-Fi, free printing, and so on, and gave it out to gig economy, the freelancers, the small businesses. Now, it was something very fancy, but it was a big idea. How it went bad was that from the business point of view, you are taking big buildings with high lease obligations for 9 years to 15 years, and you are giving it out to those customers whose paying capacity is very limited. And not only limited, but many times they are out of jobs, hence they are using a co-working space. So this is where WeWork became bad. These are the growth strategies which I won't touch right now. Now, what are the best practices to connect with investors? First of all, we have to understand investors come from the same world from which we come. The difference is they get 20 to 40 pitch decks a day. So their mental bandwidth is very limited. So, we have to, first of all, have hygiene in the sense, hygiene factor that your presence on internet should be proper. Your LinkedIn profile should be proper. There should be certain work you would have done, which anybody searches your name. Nowadays, only first 10 results people see on Google, or maybe the next 10, not more than that. So the first 10 or 20 should show what you are, what you do, what you want to do. Your internet presence should be good. Then you should always research about the investor, what his investment thesis is. If he's a B2B consumer and you go to him with something totally different, naturally he won't give you time, because in any case, they have very less time. It is an research which says that an investor spends around 90 seconds on a pitch deck. So nowadays, the video pitch decks have come. So, in case you want to make a pitch deck, don't make it 40 slides, 20 slides. Try to keep it less than 15, probably 12, and make it as simple as possible. Whatever additional data the investor needs can be given to him later on. Of course, the 10, 12 slides should cover all the points, but it need not be very laborious pitch deck. A video pitch deck also works quite well nowadays. Then you should create a proper profile on AngelList and other such sites. Those who are starting early, I would strongly suggest that you take help of some good incubator or accelerator or a startup platform like Startup Monk, and try to understand what all you need to do. So there are 3 ways in which you can take help. One is on the funding or financing side. The other one is infrastructure. You would need co-working space, printing, Wi-Fi, and stuff like that. And the third one is business contacts. You would need to align with businesses and need some referrals. In case you are reaching out to investors directly, then I would strongly suggest that you do it through a founder of a portfolio company of the investor. In case that is not available, you send a personalized invite to the investor giving 3 or 4 lines about you, and I'm sure they will accept you on LinkedIn. Then that's it. On the collateral side, you need to prepare a proper business plan, a financial model, and also very important, after SoftBank lost so much of money because WeWork IPO didn't happen and the valuation of WeWork tanked. After that, the investors are very conscious of unit economics and unit metrics, which means that if you are searching for market share, and so you should be profitable, and you should not be losing money in the process of gaining market share, because in many times we have seen that you might get market share, but you might be a very loss-making company. Investors nowadays, they are kind of staying away with these kind of vanity startup ideas. Okay, next. How to read a startup term sheet. First aspect is whether the term sheet is binding or non-binding. If the investor has given a binding term sheet, it means after due diligence of the company, maybe the price at which he's coming in decreases, but it's a binding term sheet and the investor will invest. Non-binding means that even on the last day, it's up to him to walk away and say that I'm not investing. Company valuations are given in the term sheet, at what value he's coming in, what percentage he'll take, and also whether he's coming in with preference shares. Are they convertible? Are they non-convertible? Are they cumulative? Do they bear a coupon? Coupon means that preference shares and debentures, they are quasi-debt, quasi-equity instruments. They're half debt, half equity. So till the time they are converted to equity, they can have an interest rate like a debt. So the interest rate on debentures and preference shares is called coupon. So I've seen term sheets with coupons ranging from 0.5% to 8.5% to 13-14%. But if the interest rate is more, then the investor is actually not doing a justice to you, because see, he's charging 8-9%, 12-14% interest from a startup. So he's actually not helping things out. But it may be that, I saw a $5 million term sheet given by a venture capital fund with 14% interest rate. So they were actually not wanting to come in at lower valuation. So they gave interest rate, and the founder said, no, we really want you there on the cap table, on the capital table. So he said, okay, then you pay me proper interest. So this happened. So anti-dilution means that suppose I came in with 1 crore investment, a 10% equity at 10 crore valuation. In the next round, instead of the valuation going up, the valuation in the next round was less than 10 crores, say 5 crores. So my 1 crore investment has become 50 lakhs. So I would say I have an anti-dilution clause. So you give me additional 50 lakh worth of shares. So my shareholding in the new valuation also is protected, my percentage shareholding. ESOPs mean that these startups are many times unable to pay market salaries. So they give you employee stock option plan, ESOP. So these are actually equity shares which will be issued to you in a vesting period. Vesting period would mean 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And they will be issued at a certain valuation. And they mostly come from the founder's shares. They don't come from the investor's shares. And this is a very popular way of incentivizing employees in startups. Then there are conditions precedent and conditions subsequent. So condition precedent would mean, of course, clauses like whatever information you have given to the investor, it is true. And it is, so those conditions which are bare minimum before signing of the term sheet. Condition subsequent would mean that once the investor has signed, then there will be certain conditions which have to hold true. So like there may be representation on board of directors and so on. Then voting rights, we have already discussed. Board of directors, you suppose an investor is coming in with 25% equity. So he will say that out of the 4 seats on the board of directors, you give me 1 seat. So he is entitled to that seat. So that's how it works. Then reserved matters is very important. So the investor says, I'm coming into the company, but there are some decisions of the company on which I have to be necessarily consulted. So those are decisions like if company is selling some major asset, if company is going into a merger and acquisition, if company is buying a new company, if company is getting a high paid CXO like crore salary or something. So on all these matters, the investor puts in reserved matters. And in these matters, the concurrence of the investor is a must. Then there are info rights, like the investor says, every month I need the update on financials and the performance of the company. Every quarter, I need a quarterly financial report. I need audited annual reports and so on. Founder vesting means I came in as an investor into the company. I was betting on the founder. In any condition, I don't want the founder to leave. Now, if the founder says I'm leaving, then I feel what will I do with this company? So I have a right to get the founder's equity and sell it somewhere else. So that is called founder vesting. Now, how to understand critical elements like liquidity preference, liquidation preference, options pool, and board seats. Liquidation preference would mean that in the scenario of an exit of an investor, we have given him extra returns. So if an investor has $500,000 worth of preference shares and $500,000 worth of plain vanilla equity shares, then we have given a 2x option to the investor in the preference share section. So when the sale of the company or some future liquidity event happens, then the investor will get double return on his preference shareholding because it is a 2x liquidity preference. So it is additional sweetener for the investor to tell him that he will earn more money if he invests. Similarly, on the exit side, there are 5-6 ways in which there are exits. The first option is an IPO. Every investor really wants the company to come out with an IPO within 5 years. In many cases, it is not possible. So if an IPO doesn't happen, then the second step in the exit side is that the company will appoint a third-party valuer and get a third investor. If the existing investor shares will be sold at a certain IRR, internal rate of return, something like 20%, to the third-party investor. If this also doesn't happen, then the third option is that the company will buy back the equity from the investor. So Reliance keeps on doing it. They keep on buying their own shares. So these shares are held as investment in the treasury, and they can liquidate it anytime. It becomes like an asset. So the company will buy back. The fourth option is if first three doesn't happen, then the founders will buy back the equity from the existing investor at a certain IRR. Now in India, for all practical purposes, these clauses are not so binding because equity is risk capital. So you can't force anyone else to buy your equity. So, but it's more of a relationship thing. I've seen many cases in which the founders, they actually buy back equity and give a proper exit to the investor. But in most of the cases, it doesn't happen. Then last is the options pool. It's around ESOP pool, which is around 15 to 25%. And the option pool, the ESOP pool is distributed in a reverse pyramid fashion. So if you are senior in the company, you get more share of ESOPs. If you are junior, you get less. So this is the typical structure. Because the salaries at the top are more. Then what are moats in business? So if someone of you would have seen the old forts in India or outside, they have a water around them. So the water is to prevent invaders to come in and take over the fort. So that water body is called a moat. So in the modern parlance, a moat is some feature of the product or service which stops stops the competitor from taking over the business. So there are marketplace modes, data network modes, platform, then cost mode, cultural mode, the resource mode. So I'll give you an example. You bought a Gillette razor. It cost you a bomb. And then you bought the cartridges, the blades. Now, because you bought a costly Gillette razor, you will keep on buying the blades. So because you will feel, what will I do with this razor? So that is that becomes an example of a moat which Gillette has on its product. Similarly, platform moat is very, very, it's out there everywhere. If you are using Flipkart or Amazon, if you use any other platform, you automatically feel you are losing out, because as a buyer, you know all the sellers are there. As a seller, you know all the buyers are there. So because there is a network effect mode, so all the buyers and sellers have come to that platform. So you can't really do away with that platform. So you have to be there. Then, iPhone is an example of platform network effect. They have an app store. Now, if you're using a non-iPhone, you lose access to that app store. And because you lose access to that app store, it becomes a moat. You won't change your iPhone because you want that app store. Similarly, IBM, somebody using IBM servers, they know that if they stop using it, there is a large switching cost. They have to spend so much of money with the new company. So because they know it's tried and tested, whether it is costly or whatever, one will keep on paying. Then, a cultural mode can be Coke or Starbucks or Vicks. So a child says, Mom, I'm going to have Coke. They don't say I'm going to have a cold drink. So a cold drink has become synonymous with Coke. Similarly, coffee has become synonymous with Starbucks. Similarly, if you are putting Vicks on your children, then it has become synonymous with a balm. Then there are resource modes, like Disney is a very famous example of a company which keeps on buying new companies. Like Google buys hundreds of companies every year, Facebook buys. So whatever new platform or some new content, anything new which is threatening their existence, they buy it. Now, because they buy it, they are so resourceful, they have so much of everything that you will somehow or the other spend on Disney. So like Canon printers, they have the best technology. And Canon has a huge knowledge base about the printer technology. So that's why they have the best products. And because of that knowledge mode, resource mode, you will keep on going to Canon. What does a network effect mean in business? A network effect means the same thing which I just explained, that a platform becomes so popular that there are buyers and sellers in large quantities. And because there are buyers and sellers in large quantities, you can't really do away with that. You have to create your business like a network for it to become viral, and for the demand and supply side to come. And it's also called the stickiness of the product. It's a very famous term. Warren Buffett used to stay away from investing in Apple, because he said that it's a one product wonder company, especially after Steve Jobs. But the reason why he finally invested in Apple at a very steep valuation was because he saw that the smartphone has become so sticky. If some people are holding smartphones for 8 to 10 hours a day and not leaving them, so the stickiness of that smartphone led him to invest in that. So similarly, we have direct network effect like Twitter. It's direct to consumers, Facebook, Airbnb, Uber, LinkedIn. Indirect network effect means like I am a photocopier from Canon. Now I have certain software which I use, or maybe a laptop which I use. The laptop, a lot of software companies start making operating system on that laptop. So Ubuntu, Linux, Windows, Mac, so others. So because I have so many software options available on that hardware, my hardware becomes more valuable. So then, market example is QWERTY keyboard. So our keyboard is QWERTY, and it has been the same since 25 years. Someone who invented QWERTY figured out that the customer will never leave a QWERTY keyboard because of the ease of using it. So that's the first mover advantage, and also locking in of customers onto this product. Then stock exchange is an example of a network effect. The more companies get listed, the more buyers come in. The more buyers come in, the more companies start getting listed. Then the Google AdSense. So I remember 5 years back when I started out with my startup company, Consultancy Ventures. I used to get a lot of companies which said that, we will make our platform quite viral. And I said, how will you monetize? So, sir, we will offer freemium, and then we will monetize it later. So I said, absolutely fine. I mean, a lot of companies do that. But how will you monetize? So they said, we will sell advertisements. Then I used to think, approaching individual advertisers is not easy. I mean, you require people to do that, to approach companies and so on. Google AdSense has made it so easy. You just subscribe to Google AdSense, and then you keep certain advertisement places on your website, and you link it with Google AdSense. So although the payout is very low, there is a sports company called Sporty Solutions, who's my client. They do around 55 crore turnover. And because after COVID, the events didn't happen, so they lost out a lot because the content wasn't being generated. So they opened a sports website, and they initially installed Google AdSense. So they calculated how much they are earning because the traffic was really good. Because this guy, the owner, is himself a sportsman. He has access to celebrities directly. So very good, genuine content. Then after some time, he decided to do away with the Google AdSense and sell his own advertisement. So that's a very rare example. Matter of fact, most of the companies, they find it pretty easy to use Google AdSense. Last is eBay. It's a marketplace, so I think this is it. Do I have more? No, this is it. Sivesh, so I want to thank you. If anybody has some questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, sir. I think there will be questions because I keep on seeing that people were like pinging into the chat box. And let me share the screen where we have questions, and I guess there will be people who...
So Sivesh, I will request you to also answer along with me because you are the knowledge guy, the startup guy.
Okay, just give me a second. I am just logging into the...
Shashir is asking for the deck. I can send the deck. That's not a problem. And I am approachable on LinkedIn. Anybody can approach me on LinkedIn.
Finding a deck is not that, I don't know, because being a founder, you just need to explore. Just go on Canva, and there are like 30 or 40 templates of pitch decks out there. I have like tons of videos uploaded on how to make the perfect pitch deck into YouTube channel. Just go out there. Just being a founder and entrepreneur, it is your job to do the research. We are not going to present it into the platter. Yeah. Okay, so I think we can leave the first question. If you can see the screen, Tushar. So let's leave because it is from the last session. So I will leave the first question. Okay, the first question is like, what are the minimum eligibility do you think is enough for fund raising for IT service provider company? Is there any chance IT service providing company? I am unable to understand the question first.
No, I think what they mean is a regular managed services company or a software writing company. I think so.
So this is my what I think, because I come from a completely different set of thoughts. The basic definition of startup doesn't allow an IT service providing company to be called as a startup. what we always call is an startup is something which is like innovative by nature, is disrupting the market and attracts the risk capital out there. When you talk about an IT service providing company, they will be building website or they will be building app application or web applications. So in this case, it is an agency format and not a startup. So an agency format is not that much like attractive for the risk capitals like investors and the venture capitalists. So it is one of the reason, like I will say that 99% of time an IT service company is unable to raise fund. And this is my perception, and this is why people say that I'm quite rude over it. But you need to understand the difference between an agency format and then a traditional business and then a startup, because you will otherwise you lose a lot of time chasing venture capitalists and investors without the knowledge that you are not going to get funded. So have a clarity over there, and rest I will hand it over to Tushar to share his opinion over it.
Sivesh, thank you so much. I mean, you very beautifully explained, but don't lose heart to the IT companies. I'll give you 3-4 examples. A company came to me from UK. It's called Leverize. They created a different kind of product as compared to Slack. Now, if you look at Slack, it is getting sold for, I think, $37 billion or something. So, the validation is there. For any IT company who wants to raise capital, try only angel investors. I don't think the investors, the funds have a stomach to invest in a plain software writing company, or I don't think so. So you create some product basis your strengths. So I have a IT company in Gurgaon which has created a arbitration platform, and so they are utilizing their skills to create some product in the market. And I think a product approach will get you funding. So Leverize came to me from UK. It's created a competitor to Slack. Somehow they've raised the first round pretty nicely, but then they are struggling, maybe because their product is not so good. Then A-Cloud has come to me. So everybody knows that India accounting market is ruled by Tally. Now Tally has been slow to adopt to the market. So A-Cloud is a UK company which came. They have an accounting software and they have attacked the market from a freemium model. So again, these are tech guys. They could have done regular software writing. They could have done anything regular, but they have a product approach. So like another company has come to me. They found that Dream11 is so popular. It has become a unicorn. It means more than $1 billion valuation. So what they did was, they created a Dream11 kind of virtual betting ecosystem on their app for the stock market. So, you marry ideas and you have a product approach. I'm sure. So there is a company which has a network operation center of Vistara Airlines. So that company, of course, getting funding is not easy for that kind of a company also. So they created a robo division. Now they have created 4 types of robos: disinfection robo using ultraviolet rays, food delivery, education, and robotic scavenging. So if you know that Supreme Court of India has overthrown manual scavenging of manholes and these municipal waste. So they have created robos for scavenging. So use these ideas, build something new which excites the investor. I'm sure you'll get funding.
I'm unmuting myself. I muted it because.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, Tushar sir, sorry I came a bit late to the webinar, and can I know a bit about the person?
Sorry. So
I think because we have like 10 minutes left, Tushar. So
we can take it offline. Yeah, please tell them to take it offline. I'm available on LinkedIn.
And also you can reach Tushar onto LinkedIn. He is like quite approachable person onto the LinkedIn. So you can easily go and drop him a message and he will surely gonna reply. And there also you can go and check what all Tushar has done out there. It is all there into the LinkedIn. So be there. Just look into it. Reach out to him. He is like one of the most approachable person onto the startup ecosystem. And
thank you, Sivesh.
Love to have a conversation with him. As a startup, there always it is involved in investing as an investor. While what is the strong guarantee as a founder we may give? Okay, let me start. The 9 out of 10 funded venture-backed startup fail. So this is the risk out there. So just I want to let you know the founders, the first-time founder, and the early-stage entrepreneurs, all that. But that is the risk which investors love to take, because the one startup which will do good for them is going to cover all the money that they have lost into the other nine startups. So this is how it works. And the next thing is, as a founder, you can, the only guarantee, there are 2-3 things that investors look in a startup. This is how I look, because I invested like 2 years back into some startups. So this is, first is like we would love to like the market potential, that what will be like growth. It's another thing that nobody knows anything into startup ecosystem, and everything is like calculated and calculated intellectual guesses. So it is same with the investment also. We just calculate the risk there, and we take the intelligent guesses and put money into these startups. So there is nothing like a guarantee ROI. But still, we look for like the market potential is there. What is the defensibility of your startup? So defensibility of your startup is something which Tushar also said into his presentation, that how your startup is going to defend your product. The presentation page which Tushar mentioned, that what is the defensibility, how there will be like what is the entry barrier into somebody for starting the same startup as you are already having. So these are 2-3 defensibilities there. Then a market potential is there. Then the third is like how many repetitive customer are there. So if investors see these things into a startup, they generally invest. And to start with, you need to have some good traction out there, and early revenue is always like good to have. For tech startups, not tech startup, you need to have like you need to have revenue. Then only investor is going to invest, and that is there they see the ROI. I will hand it over to Tushar further.
No, I don't have much to add, Sivesh. You have already practically covered it. But nowadays, so this Kitaki Ventures was talking to me, and so for them, they said that defensibility is very important. So they have kept intellectual property as the defensibility. So they feel if they are not able to get an exit, the company is not going anywhere. End of the day, they can sell the intellectual property and recover their money. So rest all Sivesh has covered actually quite nicely. In case you have some specifics, I'm always available on LinkedIn.
Okay, so let's move to the next question. So please tell about cap table. What is it? Okay, so I think I can. Cap table is what it's the sort form of capitalization table. So it is a table where you present the ownership of your of your startup. To briefly, so suppose that you are going to it is divided into stake. You are having 4 co-founders or founders or co-founders. So how many stake each person is having? What is your option pool? Option pool is like what Tushar mentioned, that ESOPs and all. So generally founders create a pool for that, like 10% will be given as the ESOP options and all. So what will the option pools? The stakes for the advisors and the mentors also go from that pool. So cap table is generally Excel sheet, you can say, where the ownership of the startup is divided in the form of stakes. So this is what cap table, and further Tushar you can.
Yeah, it's very simple. Yeah, it's as you said, Sivesh, where the shareholding of the company is given. This person, this much shareholding. This person, this much shareholding. Capitalization.
I think you will take the next question. How mandatory it is for investor to only consider startup where the founders are working full time? Is there any exception of this case? Tushar, please take it up.
So I
will put the rebuttal onto it, because I really enjoy these type of questions. So you just answer it.
See, I'll give you answer basis my experience. GE, General Electric, more than 100-year-old company. It's a miracle that in today's age, it is still existing. It has no founder. It has no founder, and the market cap of a company like GE, which manufactures amongst the top few companies, aeroplane engines, healthcare systems, atomic energy, high technology. their market cap is $50 billion. Google, founders are there. Apple, I mean, it's almost founder-led. Microsoft, Bill Gates is still around. Market capitalization, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion, because there is somebody to look after it. So it's my personal point of view that founder is very important in the company, and especially in the Indian context, where we have seen companies without founders not able to do much and taking wrong management decisions. And I think the founder binds together the company in many ways. And although having a professional setup also helps, but I have seen where founders were thrown out of the company by investors and the company went nowhere. So if I am looking as an investor, I don't know, मेरा दिल बहुत छोटा है, मैं तो कहूँगा founder होना चाहिए. Baki, I leave it to others for their interpretation. Sivesh, you would like to answer that?
So, okay, so this is my take on when people say that, okay, the founder is not full-time. Surprisingly, I invested into one of such companies where the founder was an Indian, but he was into Australia, Sydney. And he was like brilliant. He was working with PwC and also he was like really good. I invested into the company and I lost the money. So what I realized, initially it looked good that, okay, it is like technology is there and they can work remotely also and they can raise a startup. But they were not, and they were working also, which was like a good job. So they were like not planning to leave the job and coming to India to run the startup. The startup was based into India. So this was my take. If the founders are not trusting their dream, that it will be successful, and for that they are ready to leave their job and come and work as full-time as the founders, how can an investor is going to believe into their dream?
बिल्कुल Sivesh, बिल्कुल. अगर वो बंदा ही नहीं अपना, they are not able to put their
because he is not confident 100% that क्योंकि वो job नहीं छोड़ रहा है. That means that he is not 100% confident that his startup is going to work.
Absolutely.
Then after that, I learned that it will be like a really foolish to invest in a startup or company where the founders are not full-time. Because that means they are not only confident to their idea. So it is like one of the red flags when I see, and wherever I go into like even angel investment panel when I'm there for their monthly pitch reviews. So I really find it like red flag if the founders are saying that, okay, they are on a side hustle, but they will join once they will raise the fund, they will join full time. So I consider it as a red flag. There are different ideologies of investors. So this is what I think about, but there might be some investors who found it like really a side hustle, or a person who is like doing a full-time job and also working like a good thing for the investment. It might be their perception, but this is my perception.
Right.
So the next question is, what is the process of evaluating startup?
I will answer it separately, Sivesh, if it is for me. I will answer it on LinkedIn. Somebody can approach me.
Perfect. So whoever asks the question, just go and follow Tushar on the LinkedIn. That's it. Whenever Tushar is going to answer this, I will just share the post onto the groups also.
Okay.
So I think that will work. Okay, we will take another 2 questions. After that, I think the time will be over. So I think we'll call it a day. Next week also we are going to have, because this is something we are going to continue with. Okay, the next question is, how can a pre-revenue company get investment? What may be the prerequisite? Tushar, if you can start.
Yeah, so pre-revenue company. Now, it actually depends that which angel investor you caught hold of. So everybody knows weddings.in, right? They did 12 crore turnover. And so they had tie-ups with some banquet halls. You know that in an Indian wedding, 25 lakh, 50 lakh, 1 crore people spend. So even if you assume 25 lakhs per wedding, they did around 50 weddings. 50 weddings in a season is not much. So they did 12 crore turnover. They got sold to 400 crores to Oyo. Now, because of that example of weddings.in, a lot of copycats, they came up. So this company came to me from Bikaji Kama Place in Delhi. They caught hold of, this guy was a property dealer. So he caught hold of a builder who gave him 1.5 crore rupees for 7% equity at the idea stage. So if you are able to get this kind of investment, an angel investor, happy, happy for you. Otherwise, an exactly similar company came to me from Bangalore. They got hold of two CXOs and got 36 lakhs investment for 36% equity. So this first company was valued at more than 10 crores. The second company was valued at 1 crores. So that is about the valuation. But at the idea stage, it's a open field. People essentially bet on the founder, the horse which can run the fastest and the strongest. So essentially they bet money on the founder. So it works mostly on two things: your relationship with the investor, and secondly, how clear you are about what you want to do, and your past history of your performance, where whatever you have done in life.
Or my opinion over here, it will be, I will never fund a startup at the idea stage. That's like my ground rule. Even if you are a tech, I will think of investing in a company if they are going to have a prototype ready or an MVP, if it is a tech company. For non-tech, I am not going to invest into that. And into our fundraising course, we have created a framework that how investors see the valuation and investment into a startup. When it comes to tech, non-tech, they generally see the investment onto 3 points. That is the growth, the market size, the growth, and whether it is tech or non-tech. So you need to understand this. For tech, still getting investment on MVP stage or a prototype is easy. For non-tech, it is not easy. And second, people just make a app, make a website and start considering them as a tech company is wrong. I don't know whether you will be, how many will know about it, but Zomato is not a tech company. Previously, it was when the listing was there. Now it is a operations company completely. One of the reasons that Pankaj Chadda left Zomato, because it grew so big onto operation when they started the food delivery that he was unable to handle that. So he left. He was the co-founder of Zomato. Swiggy is not a tech company. It is a operations company. Even Oyorim is not a tech company. So stop thinking that just having an app and having a website will make you a tech company. The definition of tech company is completely different. So my take on this will be, if you are a tech company, I cannot be investors like me will think of investing at a prototype stage also or a MVP stage also, because if it works good, it will bring me like 100x return. But if you are a non-tech company, we will shy away from even until and unless you have started generating some revenue or your unit economics is making some sense to us. So this is my take.
Great answer, Sivesh.
The next, this will be the last. Is it possible for Indian startup to assign super voting right to its founder? Example, Wheelchair by Facebook, Uber, etc. So Uber founder was the person who get kicked out, so he didn't have the voting routes as such. So Travis really played coolest out there. But I know somebody in India who really plays good with the board. So he keep rotating the board members. I think Tushar might be knowing about.
No, I don't keep rotating any board members, Sivesh.
No. You might be knowing about the person whom I am talking.
I know.
Know about Bhavesh Agarwal, the founder of Ola.
Very smart.
So he's very smart chap. So what he do?
Everybody lost control of their company. If SoftBank was the investor, he's the only one, in spite of having SoftBank, he has maintained control.
Yeah, because he's somebody who rotate the board and everything in such a manner, and the voting rights and everything, that he till day he have control over his company. So he's not having super voting rights like Mark, but he has some rights which is helping him to have the control over the Ola. And today I think he is having two unicorns, the Ola and the Ola EV. Both are like unicorns as of now. So he's.
So I will just sorry, Suresh.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please.
So I just wanted. I was just telling that uh, in the case of FB, the company was so good, the startup was so good that at that point of time that investors were ready to put money even without voting rights. So that's why Mark is having that much of voting right. But it was 1 in a million case. It doesn't, in general and in normal startup ecosystem, it doesn't work like that. So you need to understand that, and it will be foolish to if you are like reaching out to Tushar for investment and all, and then you will say, okay, we will have more voting rights. So it will be foolish for you to ask. First, you need to have a startup like FB, then only Facebook, then only you can demand that voting right. So first you need to understand that also. And founder investors are not fools. They are like really experienced people. They have seen a lot of seasons. What we say, बहुत सारे सावन देखे हैं उन्होंने. So they know which will work, which will not, and voting right कहाँ देना है, कहाँ नहीं देना है. So one of the reasons that housing.com, everybody knows about housing.com, Rahul Yadav. But he was quite clear when it comes to voting right and odd. And that is what something he was fighting for, the voting rights. But he was unable to get, and then he, being a typical Rajasthani ladka, he just took it out over the board and the investors, and then he resigned and diluted his 1.125 crores of stakes to the all employee staff members, and then he left in a bit. So this is something that for that you need to be like really like either you need to be Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg or Rahul Yadav in this case. Then only you can demand that those voting rights. It doesn't work in like normally it doesn't work like that. Tushar.
Yeah, I will add to the beautiful examples which Sivesh has given here. So what Bhavish did was he saw that the philosophy of SoftBank was to have equity stakes in 2 of the top 3 startups in each sector. So he saw that they sold Uber sold out to Didi Chuxing in China. He saw that Grab was getting merged with Uber was getting merged with Grab in Singapore, and then he saw that okay, they will merge Ola with Uber, because in both Ola and Uber, SoftBank had a stake. So he amended the article of association of Ola in such a way that any investor on the cap table of Ola, if he wants to acquire shareholding of other investors in Ola, then the approval of the founder Bhavish has to be there. So that is how he blocked SoftBank from acquiring stakes in Ola from other investors and increasing their voting share. And along the way, he also daggled Dolly Laddu to SoftBank that he is opening a new electric division, and he will get SoftBank and others to take a stake there also. So they played along. It was very smart of Bhavish. And housing, we all know how the fiasco happened. But Tatas have actually used DVRs, differential voting rights, because they hold less than 50% stake in a lot of companies. And so, they have used DVRs to maintain control. And I'm sure that DVRs are available as a matter of choice for any founder in the startup. But the dynamics of that is, between the investor and the founder. So it depends on your relationship with the investor. Thank you.
There are a lot of questions still out there. So I think it's already like 6:10. We are extending the number of hours. I have another call out there. So okay. We will do one thing. We'll end it here. And I really thank Sar to not just share about
my pleasure, Sivesh,
investment thing, and but also to the Q&A in such a good spirit. And so what I will do, the questions which are still pending, we will prepare a answer to it in the text format, and we will share it onto the startup bomb groups, and we will also share these answers onto our LinkedIn as well as onto our Facebook posts on the social media basically. So if we are unable to answer your questions just because we are because of the time constraint, we are going to find your answers. So let me just check if I can answer them, some of them like really fast. For startup firm, private limited, proprietary, public limited, partner, which one are the best for operating? Private limited is best, considering you don't have any liability when you are having a private limited company. And investors, when investor is going to invest into your company, they are looking for private limited company. So this is something because you have limited liabilities when it comes to private limited. So yeah, that's why. This one is in the process of building our product and taking input from customer. What is the time you know that now you build the product and stop on the prototypes? Use the lean startup strategy. Lean startup strategy is that you create a product, send it across, and then come back with the feedback, and then again bring it into the market. So try to use that. I will keep these questions. We will answer that separately. So thank you everybody for joining. Next week also we are going to have the same sessions. Next thing we are going to bring some other speakers out here. This is a community engagement sessions that we are having for the Startup Monk community. So next week also there will be some community. We are also conducting a lot of podcasts with the entrepreneurs and first-time founders. So checking us onto social media and keep checking our update onto these Startup Monk WhatsApp groups. Till then, bye, and thank you, Tushar, once again.
Thank you, Sivesh. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm always available on LinkedIn, and Sivesh, you are anytime you want to utilize my services, always available for you.